Hi, everyone. Welcome to E2's national webinar, Conservatives, Tax Credits, and the Clean Economy, What's Next After the Big Bill? Before we get started, I want to remind all attendees that you will be on view and listen mode throughout the webinar. We will have a Q&A session towards the end of the webinar, and you can submit your questions using the Q&A function on your Zoom platform. Today, we are also offering simultaneous translation into Spanish. To hear the translation, please select Spanish via the translation function at the bottom of your screen.
Bienvenidos a todos. Les recordamos a todos los asistentes que en este momento tienen acceso al audio del programa. También queremos recordarles que en esta sesión vamos a tener una serie de preguntas y respuestas al final de la sesión. Por favor, utilicen la función de Q&A a la parte de abajo de sus pantallas para poder recibir sus preguntas. Y también queremos recordarles de que tienen disponible la opción de interpretación para que puedan seleccionar el idioma español también en la parte de abajo de sus pantallas.
Thank you. With that, I would like to hand the floor over to Sandra Purohit, E2's Director of Federal Advocacy.
Thank you so much, Ying, and happy Wednesday, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. As Ying mentioned, my name is Sandra Purohit. I am Director of Federal Advocacy here at E2. And today we're going to hear from a great series of speakers. We're going to start with Seth Hanlon from the Tax Law Center, who's going to walk us through where we landed in terms of the key clean energy tax credits in the budget resolution fight. Just kind of a level setting of where we are. We'll then get to hear a great conversation between Bob Keefe and Heather Reams and about some behind the scenes things, what took place, and also where we go from here. As Ying mentioned, please feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to post any questions. We've set aside time at the very end for questions, so after Seth speaks, we'll move right into Bob and Heather. For now, let me introduce Seth. He is Senior Fellow at the Tax Law Center at NYU. Before that, he was Deputy Assistant Secretary for Tax and Climate Policy at Treasury, where he helped to implement the clean tax incentives of 2022. Seth, if you don't mind, join us. I'll head off and would love to hear from you about where we all landed. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Andrew. I appreciate you having me. And now I was going to give a very broad overview. We have some slides that we'll pull up about how the new legislation, the new law affects the clean energy credits. So as you remember, the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 either created, expanded, or modified about 20 different tax credits in different areas of clean energy, economy, vehicles, electricity production, manufacturing, etc. And those credits, by and large, generally speaking, were due to be in effect for about a decade through 2032, give or take. And the new law makes some very large changes that I'll walk through. Do we have the slides? Okay, great. Great. So we can go to the slide number 2. So some of the most abrupt terminations made by the new law are in the area of vehicles and energy efficiency. So as you can see, there are three vehicles credits for the general clean vehicle credit, the credit for commercial clean vehicles, and then the pre-owned clean vehicles credit. Those are terminated quite abruptly. So now they need to be acquired by the end of this September, the end of next month, to be eligible for the credit. The 30C credit for EV charging stations need to be placed in service by next June. The residential energy efficiency credits, the items need to be installed, placed in service by the end of this year to be eligible. And then some of the other energy efficiency credits go until next June. We can go to the next slide. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the as we wait, the clean electricity production and investment tax credits, there was a number of different changes, and it depends on when facilities begin construction, and now it also depends on the types of technologies. Do we have that slide? Okay, great. So first of all, for facilities that are expecting to claim the production and investment tax credit that began construction in 2025, there's essentially no change because they're claiming the older versions of the PTC and ITC. There's also no change for the investment tax credit for geothermal heat pumps and heating and cooling systems. So those credits still get are still in effect for a very long time. Beyond that, though, it depends on the type of technology. So the PTC and ITC, specifically just for wind and solar, have to begin construction by next July 4th, and I'll talk about a little bit what begin construction means. And if they can't meet that beginning construction deadline, they need to be placed in service, in other words, operational, by the end of 2027. And if they can't meet those deadlines, they're ineligible for the credit. So it's a pretty abrupt termination of the PTC and ITC for wind and solar. For other technologies, including energy storage, batteries, energy storage, but then also geothermal, hydropower, nuclear, and other qualifying technologies, they have still a long runway, and those credits are in effect all the way through 2033. And then they phase down after that. Sorry, we can go to the next slide. The credit for clean energy manufacturing. So this is a credit for components like solar, wind, battery components. That's generally unchanged except for wind components. But of course, there's the effect, the demand side incentives, for EVs, et cetera, will definitely have some economic effects. The clean hydrogen credit the phase out's accelerated to the end of 2027, and some of the other credits are less affected by the legislation, and the transportation fuels credit is even extended by 2 years. We can go to the next slide. IRA has the direct pay and transferability mechanisms. So direct pay allowing government entities to claim tax credits directly as cash payments. Those two mechanisms are still essentially unchanged, fully in effect. It's just that, of course, the underlying, eligibility for the underlying credits are restricted, and the duration is cut off in various ways, but the mechanisms are unchanged. There's also new foreign entity rules that apply, that are very complicated, very onerous, very complex, and they apply most heavily to the credits to the PTC and ITC for clean electricity, PTC and ITC, and for the manufacturing credits. There are less extensive rules for other credits. So these new foreign entity rules are introducing some major complications and burdens and major areas of uncertainty in terms of claiming those credits. Next slide. Thanks. So as I mentioned, the beginning of construction date really matters a lot. The stakes are high, especially for solar and wind projects that most of which are going to need to begin construction by next July 4th. There's also some of the foreign entity rules depend on when projects begin construction. The most onerous of those rules go into effect for projects that begin construction after 2025. So of course this begs the question of what beginning of construction means. So we can go to the next slide. Beginning of construction in the clean energy industry, has had a pretty well-established, recognized meaning over the last 10 to 15 years. There's been a series of IRS notices that have established fairly clear rules for what beginning of, how a taxpayer knows that they've and can establish that they've begun construction on a project. There are, two different pathways, but the point being that, the rules are fairly clear. However, President Trump on July 7th issued an executive order regarding the terminations of the wind and solar credits that suggests that Treasury and IRS are going to publish guidance that's going to revise the prior guidance on the meaning of beginning of construction. So they're supposed to do that within 45 days of the executive order, which means basically in the next couple weeks from now. And so we are, eagerly awaiting what that guidance is going to say and how it could potentially change the, or seek to change the meaning of beginning of construction. And then Treasury is also supposed to publish guidance within 45 days on the foreign entity rules. I wouldn't expect anything too terribly detailed on that because it's just so soon after enactment, and these are extremely complicated issues. We can go to the next slide. Is just, I think, like we have some other resources summaries on the NYU Tax Law Center website. So I think these slides will be circulated, and so those resources are hyperlinked there along with my contact information.
Seth, thank you very, very much. A couple of questions. If you have additional questions for Seth, he's going to stay on. Much appreciated. Please throw those again in the Q&A. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask Bob and Heather to come on screen. Many of you know Bob. He's the executive director of E2, who spearheaded the business leader engagement in defending the clean energy credits. And Heather Ream is president of the Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions, or CRESS, which is a right-of-center nonprofit engaging on energy policy. And they were instrumental as well in the tax credit defense. With that, I'll turn it over to Bob and Heather. Thanks.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining. And Heather, it's always great to be with you, even if virtually. Thanks for taking the time for this. And
oh, it's great to be with you, and thank you for the invitation. It's an important time to try to make sense of what's happened.
well, we're here to help make sense of it, I guess. And, let me tell you something, folks. There are a lot of people who work their tails off to save what we could save for clean energy and these clean energy tax credits. And Heather, there's few people I know that worked harder than you on this, especially with conservatives and Republicans in Congress, given your relationships across both sides of the aisle, really. And I know you just came back from a fantastic break and had some time to reflect on this whirlwind that we just got hit with. So tell us your thoughts. Seth just gave us all of the specifics and so forth, but the bottom line is, I think if you talk to most folks in clean energy, they're going to say, this is bad. This is really bad, but it could have been worse. So tell us.
That's what we start with. It could have been worse.
Tell us how much worse it could have been, Heather, and why it could get worse.
Well, we were not surprised at what came out of the House. And if folks remember, the first mark out of the House before it was passed over to the Senate was not bad, but it did get worse coming over. Like, okay, we can work with some of this. So we thought we had a place to work from that would improve the House bill. Well, it didn't, right? And that's a little unusual. But then you think, well, the Senate is going to come back with something that's going to moderate. And in some ways there was, but there was a shock value in that with this excise tax that was added on. That's essentially, it's leveraging every manufacturer, whether you use a tax credit or not, and emphasizing the amount of domestic content that may or may not be able to be made. It was punitive, it was penalizing, and it started to foreshadow, what are we dealing with here? There seems to be something much like, we thought that House bill wasn't great. We're going to have work done in the Senate. With the advocacy in the Senate, at least we had a bill we were working from directly. On the House, you're working with theoretical bills. Like there's not a bill yet really to say this is it and how we're going to engage. So we didn't see like a lot of governors, even business leaders, higher level business leaders leaning in the House. I think they were holding their fire for the Senate, and that's really where it played out. So I think one is the excise tax. We were able to remove that tax being overly punitive, but that put a lot of our attention on removing the excise tax while there were other issues we needed to deal with, lengthening the time for the tax credits for wind and solar to be viable and not just 6 months. So it seemed like we were looking over here and we had plenty to work with over here. So it created a situation where we had to diversify who was hitting what, and coordination on the coalition end was really important in that during that time. Where we landed ultimately in the Senate and the passage of the bill was not what we wanted, particularly for wind and for solar. If you're nuclear, if you're geothermal, like you're doing okay, or other kinds of energy, you're like, okay, but wind and solar really took that hit. And now subsequently, we're seeing additional hits. And that makes us think, what's next? We learned this, we saw this a little bit from the House bill going from okay to worse, the Senate bill coming with the excise tax. Now we're seeing cuts from the administration, administratively, regulatory. I don't think we're done. And I think we've got a lot of work we need to do.
So you obviously talked with with Republican leadership and others in both the House and the Senate. What is driving this? What do you think? What's the backstory here?
I think we're actually getting to a point that we're seeing, Republicans were pretty handedly all the above. That's what we
Yep.
were working on. American homegrown energy is ultimately what's important. Don't worry about what kind of energy at all is important. And if I remember, 5, 6 years ago, a lot of my friends on the left side of the aisle were like, don't say all of the above.
Yeah,
And now I'm saying, remember that? We love all the
Right.
above.
right.
So I think all the above is we're getting to the Republican Party, not wholesale, but certainly in this administration, a sum of the above. It's very dangerous.
Right.
Certain kinds of energy are okay. Republicans have been critical of tipping the hand, weight on the scale of certain ways. But you've got pushback from other Republicans like Senator Shelley Moore Capito saying, wait a minute, we're Republicans. Since when do we put our hands on the scale? We don't do that. So
Right.
you've got basically those in the administration that seemingly right now are putting their hand on the scale. And you've
Right.
got other Republicans in the Congress going, no, we don't do that. You also have Republicans that are saying, yeah, sure, why not? Tip the scale. So we're in uncharted territory here in terms of Republican. And going back to Trump 1, I was running the organization and we certainly didn't see this. These are new areas that we're trying to figure out what's next. So if you're wondering, like, I didn't expect this, none of us did, even the
Right.
Republicans. And I will say that there's a lot of pressure coming from the White House. Our conversations with leadership, in particular in the House and in the Senate, a lot of pressure is coming from the White House to ensure that this is shaped very much in what the president and his close advisors want. So what that leads me to, Bob, more than anything, is that our champions and members of Congress are very important, and not just Democrats. Republicans are also very, very important. That checks and balance system works for a reason, and we need to use it.
Yeah. Well, I want to get to that, and I want to go a little deeper on that, and kind of the opportunities that we may have moving forward now that we know what the playing field is, at least today. But let's back up to how this all came to be again, and what Republicans and conservatives were thinking in Congress when this went through. And that at E2 we've been tracking clean energy projects around the country, more than 400 major projects, largely because of the policies that Republicans just killed. And the majority of those projects, 80% of the investments are going into Republican congressional districts, Georgia, North Carolina, Kansas, Texas, etc. Yet that really didn't seem to resonate with Republicans in Congress, at least like we had hoped it would be. There were certainly some. Senator Tillis, who you and I both worked with closely on this or met with quite a bit, was one of them. You know, Brian Fitzpatrick in the House and Senator Collins in Maine. But really, these are jobs and economic development and investments that are coming to the districts of people who just voted to kill the policies that are driving it. What's the thinking there?
Yeah. So
And why didn't it resonate, I guess?
Yeah, it's not a perfect square there and what we're there. I mean, the bill for the reconciliation bill wasn't just about energy. For those of us in energy, it was just about energy, right? But for members of Congress, it wasn't. So extending the Trump 1 tax credits were incredibly important to the president. It was a priority. Medicaid, SNAP were both in here. These were priorities that we heard a lot about. And we heard a lot from Republicans about Medicaid and SNAP, and from, you know, places we don't typically hear, like from Senator Hawley, for instance. Defense spending was in here. Border protection and security was also in here. And then, of course, a myriad of other priorities for certain members. So this wasn't, first of all about energy. That being said, there's a big energy component for those who care about it. So did Republicans vote against the bill? I pushed back. They voted against the bill. I think there were tides in politics that were very challenging. Ultimately, a few members refused to vote for it at the end of the day. Others, like those who signed a letter to the leadership, both in the House and the Senate, saying we want to make sure we're preserving these tax credits and they're very important. They worked very hard. They went up against leadership. There were a lot of meetings. We were in the back and forth with these members and others who didn't sign the letter, respective letters, saying that they, you know, trying to make that deal. This wasn't like, okay, we rolled over. We know there are jobs in our district. We just can't do anything about it. There was a good fight that was there. Ultimately, the politics, I think, really overcame everybody, and the pressure. I can't overstate the pressure from the White House. And what's, you know, there's no one has mastered taking on, you know, what the president wants and someone doing something else. No one, not in the United States, really not in globally as well. So there's not an example to point to say, okay, if we do this, we might get something, a different outcome. I wish there was in this case, but now all the more reason for members of Congress to be educated, to be able to engage them. They haven't left us. They didn't vote against. They didn't vote with us, but I don't think they necessarily voted against clean energy.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and I'll tell you, that's also, you know, people go, oh, really, I don't believe it.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, that is the conversations we're having with members. I'm not saying like, oh, well, now I'll consider you a champion. You know, Senator Curtis, you've been a great champion for us for a while, but yeah, we just can't work with you anymore. That's not going to happen.
Right. So how do we work with them? How do you work with them? How do we work with them? You know, as you mentioned, the hits keep coming. Today, the administration announced it's going to cancel the Lava Ridge Wind project in Idaho, which would have been a huge supplier of electricity to that region. A couple of weeks ago, they pulled the funding for the loan guarantee. It wasn't even really direct funding for the Grain Belt Express, the big transmission line through the Midwest that was going to take wind from Kansas and spread it across 3 or 4 or 5 other states at a time when electricity demand is obviously going up thanks to AI and everything else, and prices are going up. What are conservatives, what are Republicans in Congress doing from your perspective to push back on that? And frankly, can they do anything? And how can we help?
Yeah, these are the questions I think we need to unpack. So let me take these in a little bit at a time. Yes, there is definitely a continued rollback by the administration with projects that are going on all across the country. Idaho is yet another example, and here we are in a red state with high growth in an area where AI would be a perfect place for cooler weather, for data centers, and the like. Every governor in the country is competing and trying to get into this. The administration has put out AI as the main priority 2 weeks ago and talked about how they're going to meet that. And energy is an integral part of that. So we all scratch our heads and say, how are we going to get there when we have supply chain challenges, when wind and solar are ready to go right now? Storage is getting better and stronger than ever. We're virtually at baseload power with renewable energies plus storage. So what's the problem here? So I think there are some good points that clearly did not resonate with policymakers this time around. But man, do we have our work cut out for us when it comes to education. Because as much as that there's some obvious pieces for us, when we were working with policymakers and their staff, the lack of education and not understanding how clean tech and clean energy works, the investments that are needed, the upfront costs. This is not like the dot-com boom when you had, 3 to 5, 7 year event horizons of investments, and then you get your money and you're out, or you get your IPO and you're out. That's not now. These are infrastructure projects that you're not buying the lines from Home Depot, right? You're ordering it. It's supply chains. This is a long-term project, as well as the permitting that goes into that. Massive amounts of capital and time. And I think that there is a lack of education on Capitol Hill about what investors, entrepreneurs, and innovators need. It was very obvious. A small example of that to me was having to explain when placed in service was versus start of construction, and when that tax credit takes on. Well, if you're raising capital, start of construction matters versus placed in service. And that was kind of looked at like, oh, I didn't think about that.
Right.
From senior staff. So I think we have a gap in Washington that we need to be thinking about. And if all these things are true from the president, all these things are true from some of our top lawmakers, winning the AI race and giving opportunities to Americans and making sure energy is affordable and reliable and clean, we're going to have to make some choices, and this bill puts us in the wrong direction where we are. I think there'll be policy ramifications. I think prices will go up. I think people will panic. We're already seeing governors writing letters saying, hey, wait a minute, Governor of Nevada is going, guys, we need the solar. So we're already starting to see some pushback. That's just the beginning. You're starting to see members of Congress and the Senate going, Senator Grassley and Senator Curtis, like, you know what, maybe we're going to put a hold on some nominations so we can actually pump the brakes, because now that we passed the bill, that's one thing, but now we're getting to regulatory areas that we didn't expect, that are really having an effect on the ability to provide reliable, affordable, and clean energy. I think you're going to see more and more of that. And the reality is, if we have brownouts, if the costs go high, policy is going to have to change. There's no way it won't change. But it seems like we're going to have to learn the hard way. All the more reason to keep doing what we're doing. The education, do not let up. These Republican members need lots of support. They need lots of education. But I think education across the board is a place where I think you and I and others should be working together every day.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I'm not surprised, but I'm betting that some people on this call are surprised to hear such support, quite honestly, for clean energy from a right of center group. I'm not surprised by it. I know what you do, and I know how effective you are, and I know how important this is to you. But frankly, I've heard from our members and others who have said, "Why in the world would we continue to support these Republicans who say they're for clean energy when they just voted against it?"
I understand that sentiment too, and I know it's fair to be frustrated. I want to kind of meet people where they are on this too, and say it's fair to be frustrated. It's fair to wonder what happened. But I do think we do need to think about what happened, what needs to happen moving forward. Generally, I'd say that clean energy and support for clean energy is relatively new for Republicans. This isn't part of their natural talking points, but they did get there naturally on their own because of their own way of engaging. But they're not going to Republicans are not going to support, because of climate action necessarily. They're going to do so because of an economic argument. They're going to do so because it matters to voters in some way, shape, or form. And that doesn't change. Young people, independents, suburban women still care about having clean, reliable, and affordable energy, particularly young people as they're starting to come online and vote, 18 and beyond. This is regardless of what they are in terms of Republican or Democrat. Most Republican young youth believe that the climate is changing and the government has a role to address it. Tax credits is a way to do that. And I don't think that's going to change. And Republicans as a party are going to have to answer for that.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to open this up to questions from the crowd, and I want to invite Sandra and Seth to rejoin us. And Sandra, hopefully you've been looking at some of those many questions that are popping up in the queue and can help us with that. But Heather, one last question
Yeah.
before we open it up to the crowds, the virtual crowd, so to speak. You talked about a lack of education on the Hill, and certainly we saw that. I don't know how many fly-ins we did, several anyway. Everybody else did as well. And you know, some of our E2 members who are on this call right now accompanied us there in the everything from the wind to the battery to the EV business sectors. And toward the end, you probably heard the same things that we were hearing from Republican lawmakers was, I've had too many meetings on this already. I don't want to, you know, I can't, I've heard it all. I don't want to hear anymore. Yet there's still that lack of education. In your opinion and with your guidance, how do we do that? And what should the business people on the line be thinking about, and how can they help with that?
This is, I think, the question that is probably keeping me up most at night. Like, where do we go from here?
Yeah.
You go, okay, education, are we gonna, and the question, are we gonna be back in the same position that we are now? Because it doesn't feel great right now. Policy does ebb and flow. So we've seen that quite a bit. We know that bipartisan policy, bipartisan legislation is the most durable policy. Thinking back to how the IRA was passed, while it had a lot of Republican DNA in it, it was passed in a partisan way through a reconciliation process. If you like bipartisanship, you may not like reconciliation. It's a tough process, but it is a process. Both parties use it, and the IRA was passed in a reconciliation mode. So Republicans didn't contribute to it. And I think that's a very interesting lesson, important lesson to pull into the next time, because there is going to be a next time. At the next time of making sure Republicans and Democrats are passing legislation together. Already we're seeing Senator Grassley, who considers himself the grandfather of wind and supporting it, putting a hold, right? Having questions, asking questions, a senior, genteel man, Republican saying, hey, wait a minute. If he's thinking it or doing it, you know, there are other Republicans thinking and doing it as well. So I'd say, first of all, that we need to make sure that engagement is very important. Another piece, I said that, I'm concerned about all the above, and I am concerned about all the above. The administration has a lot of power to talk about some of the above, and I'm hearing a lot of members, not just from the Freedom Caucus, talking about, fossil-centric energy being, dominant. But energy is a mix, right? Of all, the solar industry isn't saying we should have all solar. It should be 100% solar. It's a mix. And certain geographies have certain resources that they're going to deploy and use. And so that's why the voices of those members who represent those districts are very important to continue to do that. And finally, third, I think we need to really, I'll go back to this, really think about how we're educating, not about the jobs, not about energy diversity, not about emissions reduction or affordability, but really what do investors need to create that business certainty that makes America hum, to puts America on top so we're winning globally. And that part of the conversation has not been strong enough. And I found the biggest gaps there. So as I move forward as an advocate in our organization and working with you, Bob, and others, I'm looking for bringing those voices about what it takes to invest, moving that forward, moving that agenda forward, creating principles, bringing voices forward, and a whole lot of education.
And I think importantly, having the power we need, the energy we need to make this economy continue to hum and to make us competitive, especially in the AI marketplace, for instance, which
think about what we, if you're talking to Republicans and talking about business certainty, investment strategies, this is a receptive audience to this time of conversation already. So we're not having to change anyone's mind. This is really about education here and an understanding about the kind of policy that's needed to be able to build big projects and move energy from point A to point B, or to build the energy itself to meet those demands. And these are demands of certain states. These are demands of companies and of our well-being and our global competitiveness. this language and this word salad all means something to Republicans. We just have to connect A, B, and C together in a way that they're going to say, I need to think about this differently. We did that with creating an all the above message and thinking about American homegrown energy. I think we can also do that in educating about the economics and what it takes for America to shine.
Yeah, great. Well, we're going to figure out how to do that together, I hope. But
Better do it.
meantime, Sandra, Seth, welcome back. And Sandra, do we have
Thanks.
questions from the audience?
We do, and just a reminder, if you want to add new questions, just the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. But thanks for all of you who have put in questions. I'm going to summarize some and merge some just as we move forward. The first question is for Heather. You know, when you said we have a lot of work to do, a lot of work left to do, is that to prevent more degradation or to restore some of what's lost? And is there hope that this person's asking about a second budget resolution or reconciliation bill, and would it be a vehicle for undoing any of this?
Yeah, so I think there's blocking and tackling for certainly that we're going to get the tactical helmets and equipment on here because there's a lot of that that we didn't anticipate from the administration. And I think absolutely protecting what's left is going to be kind of the first level of defense in some way. I think the education is a longer term strategy that we're going to have deploying, you know, immediately, learn from that and continue to build on that and learning from one another. That's why coalitions are so vital. I think third, there is talk, at least in the House, of 2 more reconciliation packages. They want to do 2. I talked to my friends in the Senate and they say, hell no. So but people are saying that just post what they just went through and they're tired. But I think there is a likelihood of another kind of reconciliation package. And what will be in there, there's always an opportunity for fixes, for elements to change, to go back. We're going to use the opportunities in the vehicles that come to us. This work as an advocacy is always about opportunity and being opportunistic when that vehicle is there, or when something like catastrophic, like a hurricane or a wildfire hits, and elevating the conversation that you need to have at that time. This work is no different. We know what we need to do. We just have to be smarter about how we're engaging. And as I talked about, thinking about how we get to Republicans and bring them to a place where they already are, and then educate them about this is no different than building anything else that you'd want to build. It needs business certainty. It needs the right kind of investment. It needs to incentivize entrepreneurs to invest and for innovators to come up with their best. You know, I want to start waving an American flag when I say that because it sounds so mom and apple pie and so simple. The devils are in the details, and that's my job. That's my team's job. And then working with other people and other allies to make that happen. We can do it.
Thanks very much, Heather. And I'll just add that you sense that an additional budget resolution process may also be an opportunity for others to do worse. So it's a mixed bag. Right.
Yeah, I will tell you, my glass is usually half full rather than half empty. So I need someone to balance me out on that. But it's been a little empty recently. So we're coming up with a plan. I'm really encouraged by the conversations that I've been having the rest of the summer, and I'm looking forward to getting into the fall where people are kind of back into regular order, if you will, and conversations about what's next are happening. But I'm at a conference right now where we're talking about what's next. And I'm quite encouraged by both the staffers that I'm with, the Hill staffers, and with the corporations and trade associations who aren't stopping.
Yeah, completely agree. And I would just also add that as those other opportunities come, the political winds may have shifted based on what happens as a consequence of the passage. So always looking for that. I'm going to shift over to Seth. Seth, you have a couple of questions I'm going to combine. You touched on this a little bit, but if you could elaborate, you know, what's the risk of repeal for any of the other existing bonus credits for solar, LMI, low to moderate income, etc., any of those credits? And then a question about what qualifies as a foreign entity. The Hyundai, and he talks about a Hyundai, or this person talks about a Hyundai plant in Georgia. And so if you could just elaborate a little bit more on what they're talking about when they talk about foreign entities concern.
Yep. Starting with the bonuses, there were very minor changes. The bonuses are essentially fully in effect, unchanged. And now, of course, like you can't get the bonus if you can't get the underlying credit. So for like wind and solar, obviously that will have that. That's the has a extremely large impact. But the bonuses themselves, if to the extent that a project qualifies for the underlying credit, the bonus rules are essentially the same. There is one change to where the investment tax credit, where the threshold is raised for the percent of manufactured products that you have to have that are domestically produced. There was a mismatch between the ITC and PTC, and they raised the ITC thresholds to meet the PTC thresholds. But that's essentially the only change. But of course, the changes to the underlying credits are the main thing. And on foreign entities, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, so I think that the legislation creates this definition of a prohibited foreign entity, and I think like what that means is Chinese, either produced in China, but not just produced in China, but produced anywhere in the world by an entity that has some level of Chinese ownership. So if it's a company that is producing in the United States, that's not automatically good, because you need to look at the producer and see whether they're, let's say, have 25% owned by Chinese people or Chinese companies. And then it's not only China, there's some other countries as well, but they're less relevant, like Russia and North Korea and Iran, and some other kind of lists of forbidden entities, like terrorist lists and others. But by and large, it is entities that have some degree of Chinese ownership.
And so it's specific to countries. It's not any foreign entity. It is these specifically listed foreign entities in statute. So thank you for that clarification. Our next question is, what does this all mean for carbon neutrality and the clean economy? And what does it mean for energy availability? Like, if we can take it up to the 10,000-foot level, this looks like technical changes, but what does it actually translate to on the ground? And I'll open that up to either of you.
I was just having a conversation about asking people if they were going to the UN Climate Conference at COP, which is going to be held in Brazil, both with companies and trade associations and certain members of Congress. And it's interesting because COP has been, there's been criticism that it's not focused on, keeping emissions low, but it's becoming much more of a trade show and it's very big. But I think at this point, it's very important that we are having the buy-in from corporations and from countries that want to continue on. This is a change in the US. It's not a change in the world. For one, there are plenty of companies that want to continue to engage in a clean economy. They're making money off of it. It's smart investments for them. They're not doing it just because they want to save the world. And that doesn't change. I think there are setbacks, though. I think what I feel is like the momentum that we had from the IRA and some of the excitement about the global competitiveness in the clean economy has been diminished, and will continue to be diminished based on the signals that we're seeing from the administration, which tends to be the mouthpiece of a country. I think it's important, and we did this in different administrations when we've been trying to educate the world that there were Republicans that cared about this issue, bringing them the COP, speaking at Climate Week and National Clean Energy Week and other venues. We continue to do that. It's more important than ever. And I think those members of Congress and policymakers who are able to do that need our support more than ever to continue some kind of momentum. We can't go backwards with our members of Congress. We should only think about moving forward. Yes, it's a hit. Yes, I feel like the momentum is there. I don't want to sugarcoat that at all, but let's kind of regroup, buckle our seatbelts and move forward.
I've seen a caveat this. I'm not a climate modeler, but I've seen some estimates that have helped me sort of put some scale on it. So the Rocky Mountain Institute or RMI, so first of all, our our climate goals, at least as established under the previous administration, was to cut emissions by U.S. emissions by more than 60%, relative to by 2035, relative to the high water mark of 2005. So the goals is more than 60%, and according to RMI, we were on pace for anywhere between 31 and 51% reduction. So obviously wide band of uncertainty, but definitely not all the way to our goals, but making significant progress. But now with this legislation, they project it'll be between 27 and 44%. So emissions still declining, and obviously, and clean energy still expanding, but certainly a significant setback from the pace the trajectory that we were on before the law.
And not where we need to be, obviously. And to Heather's point, yes, the rest of the world is moving forward at speed. China built more solar and wind, I think, this year than the United States has built in history. What this law does is it puts more red tape. It makes it more costly to build clean energy in America, and that was the energy that supplied 95% of all new energy on the grid last year, or is set to this year, I believe. So it's a horrible hit. The good news is, when it comes to climate action, the rest of the world is picking up the pace. Unfortunately, we're getting left behind. We're going to get left behind on international markets. The businesses that are investing in innovation and clean energy solutions in America are going to have a tougher time selling their products, certainly here domestically, but they're going to be behind the competition internationally as well. And that's going to hurt us, period.
The data will bear that out at some point. Like I said, it's a hell of a way to learn in some places, but I think we will see. But I do think there is a technology, as it improves, always tends to improve our lives. So lower emissions products is what the markets want at the end of the day. They're going to demand that. So I think I think Seth, you brought up a really good point, and maybe it's not the pace of reduction, but there's still going to be some reductions. So fear not, but we'll work to get those more accelerated.
I mean, you've touched on this a little bit, but I will just say, this person said they've just traveled to Germany and France, and Europe is so much further ahead. How much of an awareness is there that we are behind internationally? Or is that just essentially another education opportunity and need? And
nothing like bringing members and staff over to go see different countries and what they're doing, how it is different. I traveled also over to Europe this summer and saw a lot of things that were like really incredible and very impressive. It's almost part of the culture in Europe. But we also have countries that are going to be emerging economies that are going to be looking for cleaner fuels rather than burning coal or wood or other, and they're going to be looking for American natural gas, for instance. If they start using natural gas, their emissions are going to go down. So let's not forget that there are emerging economies that are going to be less polluters because they are going to be importing American, freedom gas, right? So there are opportunities to reduce emissions that are more than just the deployment of renewable energy.
Bob, anything to add to that? Seth? Okay, then the next question is, have you noticed a shift in the engagement in the renewable energy industry? Is there an acknowledgement that there is, or an understanding that, like oil, we need to be organized and engaged?
I definitely have thoughts on this. So, one of the pieces I think that's important, and we hear oftentimes when we're advocating, is, and I hate to bring up the being political here, but typically clean energy isn't as politically active. We do a lot of education and advocacy, but that doesn't necessarily translate into those political dollars. I think it's a gap that we have for those that are in the clean energy industry to be supporting members of Congress, both with their voices, but also their wallets. I think that's a place that can be doing a lot. So I asked a question, when we were going through reconciliation, what industry or what groups have been, writing big checks to Thune or Senate leadership or the House leadership funds, and it's crickets, very few. There are certainly people writing checks to certain members of Congress and maxing out to them individually, but really a holistic approach about how we're engaging the Republican Party, both on the policy, the communications, and the politics, and the giving. The giving is lacking, and there's plenty of data out there that says that. I think it's a place where we need to really start doubling down, and voting also with wallets too in that way, and helping, and then holding them accountable. We lack that, whereas oil and gas don't have that problem, but so much giving that they've given over the years, and they have a massive head start. So I think it's a place that there's conversations I'm having. I'd love to continue to have. We have many, many thoughts about this. We even put together a document. It's like, if I had $1 million, what would you do with that to help improve the influence of clean and renewable energy in the Republican Party? And it has to be sustained. It can't be like, oh, we have a champion today, but we're not going to be supporting that person tomorrow. This has to be a long-term relationship. To be able to do so. That's going to change systems and dynamics. Maybe not tomorrow, but it will over the years.
You sound a little like our mutual friend Jigar Shah, who says, look, clean energy is the energy industry in America right now. It's the biggest, it employs the most people. It provides the most power, new power on the grid, et cetera. So it ought to be acting like that. With our 501c3 hat firmly in place here at E2, we're not going to get into the details of that, but I will say that I would imagine it's hard for donors to donate to people who just voted against them. So really, I think
This thing is real. I get it.
Republicans, I think, kind of need to be honest, put their actions where their words are, and deliver something that is beneficial for the industry, and or push back on the red tape and the increased cost that and all of the above that are so central to conservatives. And I bet some of that would start happening. But
well, creating a culture of getting things done and winning in Washington doesn't seem to happen that much anymore. A place where we have bipartisanship, at least we've had it, is in permitting reform. We've got pretty close last Congress, and talking about permitting reform. This is something that, of course, was attached to IRA as another part 2 of that Senator Manchin was working very hard to get before his retirement, that didn't quite come to fruition. And this is something that House Republicans are talking about, and House and Senate Republicans as well. And then I think there's a bill that even Scott Peters, a Democrat, has signed on to with Chairman Westerman. So we're starting to see some bipartisanship. Maybe that's the next place to show some goodwill, is in permitting reform, and it's something we can work on together to kind of get beyond and see if we can make some changes later down the road. But we need some forward positive momentum, certainly, to, I guess, show Americans that we can govern in a bipartisan way. That would be a great place to start.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just going to add in also, I just to double down on Heather's point of consistency. I think continuing the education piece with the C3, I'm doing a combination. Heather's consistency, Bob's C3 hat, just the education and the continued tracking of the consequence, because that can help to inform the shifting dynamic on the Hill. And so, we've laid a lot of groundwork. I will say that this provided us a lot of opportunity to have a lot of business leaders meet with a lot of Republican members, and there was some significant education with the member level meetings where the members were telling us what they understood, and it was leaps and bounds from the beginning of this year. So there has been some progress, and we don't want to let that lapse. We want to kind of let them know what the on-the-ground implications of this are, and to just keep the conversation open to see if there can be solutions, whatever the vehicle opportunities are. I'm going to ask one last question about innovation. This person said disruptive technologies can multiply the uptake rate of all sorts of things and maybe even counter political dynamics. Is that enough? And or can you speak to the impacts of innovation of these changes? So is innovation alone going to save us? And or what has this bill done to impact innovation in energy?
If innovation can't get funded, it's going to stay on the shelf, unfortunately. I think that's an important part. So the incentives like the tax credits were important for something like that, or something that's hard to fund, and the loan program office being a very important piece of that. So there are some crutches that are removed right now. I think we need to have a serious conversation about how we're going to continue to be the #1 innovator in the world. And I don't think anyone expects the government to be the one that's innovating. The government doesn't necessarily innovate, but they help the policies facilitate those innovators and investors. And if they're not incentivized in the right way to continue, then we're really losing the essence of the United States. This is why I think these are good talking points and policy priorities to bring to Republicans to create more business certainty, regardless of the kind of energy or technology that one may prefer, because it changes over the years. And we all know that. History dictates that. But that stable policy is going to be incredibly important. It keeps apparently Seth from this back and forth of having to get his decoder ring out every time and figure it out. But I'm sure there are plenty of investors and business people here who are like, what just happened? This is not America. A final point on that is that there were many, many Republicans who were saying they didn't support the tax credits necessarily. They didn't feel like it was the role for government, but they disagreed with pulling the rug out from underneath businesses so quickly and wanted to give stronger off ramps. That was a major consideration in the Senate, and why we were able to extend more timeline for the sunset of the tax credits particularly for wind and solar. I don't think it's, personally, I don't think it's a long enough timeline based on what was promised, but it was better than the 6 months. And this is from a number of Republicans saying it's not business, it's not fair, it's not the way business should be run. I think we really need to tap into that as advocates and as business leaders.
Great. And also just flag, we spent a lot of time today focusing on the tax credit portions of the One Big Beautiful Bill, but there were other IRA provisions that lost funding. You talked about Department of Energy. There are conversations about pulling back funding for things like innovation, the Energy and Renewable Energy Office, and etc. So more to look at in terms of the innovation front on those parts as well. Just got 1 minute, 30 seconds, closing thoughts or things you want folks to take away from this in terms of how to stay engaged and how to make change still, given where we are right now.
I'm going to pass my baton over to Bob and to Seth.
Well, look, I would just say, first of all, thank you all. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Seth. Thank you, Sandra, for running this thing. Thanks most of all, everybody, for tuning in. And, we didn't like, nobody liked how nobody on this call anyway, liked how this thing turned out. As we've heard, it could have been worse. It should have been a lot better, to be honest. But now we got to pick up the pieces and go where we can go and save what we can save and continue to make progress as much as we can. And we can't do that without hearing the perspectives of all sides of all who are involved, which is why I really am grateful for Heather joining us, because she has a perspective with conservatives that a lot of other folks on this call might not have, and frankly might not care to hear, but we got to hear it and we got to figure it out. So I am just really encouraged by our work together with Cress, Heather, over the recent years, and hope we can figure out ways to make our issues nonpartisan, bipartisan, and continue to make them that, and more importantly, make others who are in power understand that there shouldn't be.
Look forward to that. I can't agree more. And we do have a rallying call right now, so let's take advantage of it.
Yeah.
It's already 3, so I'm gonna jump in on that. Sorry, Seth, and just say A couple of folks asked about recordings and Seth's presentation. Yes, all of that will be available and provided as a follow-up to this presentation. You should get an email. Let us know if you don't. But thank you all for joining us. If you're not already a member of E2, please consider joining us and supporting our work on advocating for policies that are both good for the economy and good for the environment. You can do that at e2.org/join. But otherwise, thank you very much, Heather and Seth and Bob, for a great conversation, and onward. Have a great Wednesday afternoon. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.